Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year 2022. We welcome you all to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage counseling, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one session and also group setting. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550. And our website is lifecoachdanamzalai.com. Today, I'm very excited to have, for our last episode of season 4, a very special guest, Neil McKinlay. And just like every of my past episodes, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Neil, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And thanks for letting me be here. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk with you and your listeners. So, as you said, my name's Neil McKinlay. I live in Victoria, British Columbia on the west coast of Canada with my wife and my daughter. And I am an embodied meditation teacher. And, my history with this practice, I have been meditating most of my adult life. When I was a teenager, I was a competitive swimmer. And one weekend when we were away at a swim meet, the assistant coach of the team I belonged to taught us how to meditate. He got us to sit on our rolled up sleeping bags, close our eyes, say a mantra, and meditate. And I found it interesting from the go. There was something about it that hooked me. And so I followed that interest for a number of years. I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of the practice. So it was a very kind of loose form of meditating. And then about 30 years ago, I started to give this engagement a little bit more form, a little bit more structure. I studied and practiced in 2 successive communities that are both rooted in Tibetan Buddhism. I studied and practiced with some intensity, engaging formal curriculum, doing long retreats. And then after my own career as a swim coach ended, I started teaching. A couple of years ago, my relationship with the second of those communities that I mentioned ended. And I knew I wanted to continue teaching meditation. I knew I wanted to continue teaching the embodied form of meditation that had been my focus for the previous 20 years. I knew I wanted to take this work deeper in some way, but I didn't know exactly what that was. And I spent some time looking back on my teaching experience over the last decade, the previous decade and a half. And it seemed to me that the people who went deepest with this work, the people who seemed most affected, whose lives were most affected, by the practice of meditation, were not necessarily those who practiced the most or studied the most advanced texts. It was people who studied and practiced regularly and found ways to mix the teachings and practices of meditation with the stuff of their everyday lives. And this has become the focus of my work. How do we practice and study in the midst of our busy, full, responsibility-laden everyday lives? How do we mix meditative experience with the out in the world experience of work and relationships and so on and so forth? How do we bring meditation and life, these 2 things that are often thought to be so separate from one another? How do we bring these 2 together and allow the benefits of meditation, which include, a kind of a deeper relationship with these basic human qualities such as steadiness and ease and clarity and sensitivity? How do we bring these qualities into a world that, to my eye anyway, really seems to need them right now? And that's my work.
That is something that here's my question, and I'm sure that thousands and thousands of people all through your career probably have asked you prior to understanding exactly what are your teachings. Now, I'm sure that a lot of people have a very big difficulty in just sitting down, closing their eyes, and thinking about nothing, because nothing is really something. But how can they separate themselves from life's obligation, as you mentioned just earlier, and yet think about nothing? I mean, it's hard for the brain to fathom what nothing means. So in the midst of meditation, how can someone accomplish this difficult task?
Well, I mean, Dan, that's a brilliant question. And maybe it's one of a half dozen $64,000 questions that exist in meditation. And people ask me this all the time. I do a fair number of, well, pre-COVID, I did a fair number of introductory classes and workshops here in Victoria. And it would often come up, people would ask me exactly that. How I know meditation involves having an empty mind, having a blank mind, thinking about nothing, but I can't do that. Now, the first thing that I found interesting about that is that people would bring this notion up, even though I never, ever, as an instructor, mention that. I never say meditation involves having an empty mind. Meditation involves having a blank mind. Meditation involves thinking about nothing, because it's not true.
Okay.
So that's great. We're suddenly off the hook.
Yes.
So meditation doesn't involve a blank mind. It doesn't involve thinking about nothing, which raises the question, so what does it involve? And how are we to relate with those thoughts that are like flying around? Mm-hmm. So when we're meditating, what we're doing is we're recognizing, one way of understanding it is we're recognizing that we do get caught up in all our thoughts about everything. I have groceries to do. I've got dinner to prep. There are dishes to wash. I have a meeting tomorrow. I've got this interview with Dan. So meditation doesn't take away the dishes. It doesn't take away the groceries. It doesn't take away the podcast interview with Dan this morning. What it does is it recognizes that our thinking mind can kind of grasp onto these things really tight and cause a lot of tension and anxiety and stress in our lives. This is what Buddhism is pointing to when it talks about suffering. So we get really conceptually caught up in the fact that we need to do groceries later today. And what meditation does is it doesn't change the fact that we need to get groceries. That remains a fact of life, but it helps us loosen the grip of those thoughts. It says, okay, you're caught up in thinking about groceries. You're going to have to do groceries at some point. That's fine. But let's relax that thinking mind a little bit, that gripped mind a little bit, by bringing our attention back to something else. And in the work that I do, that's something else, because it's embodied meditation, is some aspect of our embodied experience. So a good friend of mine once described it as a shifting of allegiance. We shift our allegiance from the thinking about doing groceries to the immediacy of our embodied experience. Okay, I'm a little bit tense. I'm a little bit anxious. I'm a little bit nervous about how I'm going to fit this all into my day. It feels like tingling. It feels like prickly. It feels warm. And then back I go to that thought about the grocery store. Okay, no problem. Just relax and come back. And what happens as we do this more and more is we begin to settle. Our allegiance begins to shift. We begin to settle more and more in embodied experience as opposed to that caught up conceptualization. And when that happens, there are moments, it does happen on occasion. There are moments where our minds are empty, that our minds are blank, when there are no thoughts. But that's not a necessary precondition of meditation. And it's actually, in my experience, a very rare experience. Most of the time, I'm undulating between, I'm caught up in this thought, and here I am back in embodied experience. Caught up, here I am. Caught up, here I am.
So would you say, Neil, that meditation is a constant battle between consciousness and subconsciousness?
I think that's a good way of understanding it. Yes, because a lot of times, I'm going to leave it at that. Yes, I think that's very true.
We all know that subconsciousness is definitely much more powerful than consciousness.
Yeah.
So meditation is kind of a form of self-hypnosis, because when you put yourself into a trance, you're allowed to detach yourself from the awakened moment of consciousness, which always is berating you with thoughts and challenges. I got to do groceries, I got to do this, I got to do this. But yet subconscious only comes in when you're actually asleep. So how can you build that bridge between both?
By one of the ways that that happens in the practice is I talked about how we're shifting our allegiance from being conceptually gripped by whatever it is, the grocery store, and being present in our immediate experience. So conscious is, to use the language you're using, conscious of this present moment. And one of the things that happens when we are conscious with this present moment, it's a very open, a very spacious, a very allowing sort of consciousness, or consciousness, yes. And what that does is it creates conditions and it creates space for the unconscious material of our life to begin to arise and come into consciousness. I mean, that's really one of the things, one of the dynamics that drives us into this gripped conceptual place. Up comes something from the unconscious. It's a little bit uncomfortable. I don't want to deal with it. So I go into the comfort of these gripping thoughts. So how do we bridge the two? How do the two both have room in our lives? Come back to immediate experience, consciousness, and in the resting in embodied experience in this open, relaxed way, it creates a condition for, it allows space for unconscious material to begin to arise and become part of our conscious life.
Wow, that is really interesting there, Neil. Now, would you say with confidence that after years and years of meditation, when there's less battle between consciousness and subconsciousness or unconsciousness, do you think that someone have mastered meditation? So let's say if you take the example of the grocery, if let's say you say you go back and forth, so you think the grocery, you put a grip on it, and then you let yourself relax, you let yourself get into like a more serene environment, but then you go back into thinking about groceries or whatever it is. So this back and forth, if it's kind of cut off in half, does it mean that the person is actually on its way to fully understand the benefits of meditation?
I think one of the best teachings I've ever heard or ever received about meditation is one of the simplest, and this is often the case for me. I remember years ago, I was told that the Tibetan word for meditation, which is GOM, Gom, translates as to become familiar with.
Okay.
So meditation is becoming familiar with. And what are we becoming familiar with? Our everyday, ordinary human experience. And I think, yes, with a lot of practice, or even with a little practice, with a lot of practice, we do become more familiar with how it is for us as human beings. And so we do recognize, I've noticed this in myself and the people I work with, we do recognize the dynamics that drive our lives a little bit more. So I'm a little bit more prone to catch myself in the grocery store getting caught up in something. And I have a little bit of practice in relaxing that and coming back to this immediate experience. I wouldn't claim that I or anyone I know is a master, although there are people who've done this work for a very long time who I really respect their agility with this work. But I would say that there are people I know who have a really refined familiarity with what it is to be a human being, what it is to be caught up, what it is to come back, what it is to be conscious, unconscious, and to bridge these two.
Now, can you say with certainty, or maybe not, I'm not sure, that meditation just doesn't heal the human mind, but it could also heal the physical aspect of it. So can people really, by meditating deeply and being in that trance that we're talking about, can they heal any illnesses, physical illnesses?
I think, through the practice of meditation, we allow room for the basic healing functions of the human organism to come forward, be them psychological or be they physical. And again, I like to simplify things. And just looking at the dynamic we were talking about a few minutes ago, when we're caught up in our thoughts about something, the grocery store, when we're gripped in that way, there's a tremendous amount of stress placed on the human organism, physiological stress. When we come back to the immediacy of this present moment, again, in the work I do. It's the embodied experience. When we come back to embodied experience, that stress begins to unwind a little bit. It begins to release a little bit. We come into contact with the basic sense of ease and relaxation that's in our system, in spite of the fact that we still have groceries to do and interviews to take care of and so on and so forth. And this emergence or sense of connection with these qualities, I think, really allows the human organism kind of an optimal opportunity to do what it can to heal itself.
So what are the typical clients that comes to you that says, I want to learn meditation? What kind of problem are they dealing with when it comes to the desire to be able to reach out to you and understand a little bit better the benefits of meditation? Are they people that have gone through a tremendous amount of stress or post-traumatic disorders that they want to be able to kind of manage a little bit better? What are the typical clients?
I think it's usually people who have recognized that there is a dissatisfying amount of endemic stress in their lives. And that's often the term that people would use, stress. The specific way that manifests, of course, is going to vary from person to person. But I think that recognition is fairly common. There's a recognition of a high level of ongoing stress and a inkling, a suspicion that there is somewhere out there a way to do things differently where the stress isn't quite so high and quite so affecting in our lives.
So, the typical individual that needs to be able to want or that's looking to be able to see a change in their lives, how long does it usually take them, if they do it on a day-to-day basis, for them to be able to start seeing benefits?
That's a really interesting question. And, I don't want to peddle in miracles at all here, but often people will report an effect in their first meditation practice, just because prior to engaging the meditation, let's assume someone has never meditated before, prior to engaging the practice, maybe we don't have a whole lot of tools for dealing with that dynamic of caught upness. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, one of the tools I had for dealing with the fact that, I have groceries to do and I just can't stop thinking about it, prior to engaging meditation in kind of a deep way, my main tool, and still is to a certain extent, to be honest, my main tool in dealing with that was thinking about it, right? I'd think about my thinking, like, okay, I'm really thinking too much about this grocery store. I'm going to put it aside. I really want to, get away from that. It's driving me crazy. So I'm going to stop thinking now. Okay, stop thinking, Neil. Stop thinking. Don't think. So I try to think my way out of, not being caught up. And, people will come in having tried this in their own lives, and suddenly in their very first class, they're given a tool. Okay, we're all got our attention on, what we're thinking, planning, hoping, fearing in our lives. Just for 5 minutes, let's shift that attention here to, let's say, the breath coming into the lower belly. And a lot of times, people haven't had that tool prior to coming to a class, and getting that tool, it's like, wow, that's a difference. There's a difference right away.
So would you say, and I know I'm going to put you into like a little bit of a challenge here. So those who actually are perfectionists versus those who are procrastinators, would you say that the perfectionist people are more prone to stress more often because they want everything to be perfect? So they are more needing meditation versus procrastinator, where they always think, I'll do it tomorrow, don't worry about it. So they don't really think too much, as you mentioned, about the task at hand. So how would you differentiate both?
Well, I think, what kind of stress and strain do each category of individual experience? I think the perfectionist, in my own experience, as you note, the perfectionist experiences strain through the expectation that everything's going to be perfect, right? Everything's going to be a certain way. This is going to be this way. This is going to be that way. And it has to be this way. And when it isn't this way, my stress level goes way up. I think people who procrastinate also experience a tremendous level of stress and strain, at least in my experience. It might be different, but a lot of the people I know who procrastinate stress and strain because they have an expectation that things should be not perfect or not exactly the way it should be, but somehow different. Like, oh, I can't believe I didn't get to that today. I can't believe it. That's like so frustrating. I'm going to get to it tomorrow. Oh, I didn't get to it. So both categories of people have, I guess, mental dynamics that cause a lot of stress for them, a lot of strain for them, a lot of anxiety in their lives.
So, how does your program or say your retreat works, Neil? I mean, is it like a 2-day retreat, 3-day retreat? Is it like a 1 month program? How do you offer this?
Well, like many people, with the advent of COVID, my work has changed significantly, and almost everything is now online. And I think there's maybe three ways to talk about, what gets offered. On the most general sense, there's simply a number of resources out there. I have guided meditations, I have writings, I have a podcast, et cetera, that people can access and take advantage of and just resource themselves. And then I have a free to join community called the Living Meditation Network that provides a little bit more of container for people to access resources and interact with one another. And then there's a paid community, a monthly or annually subscription community called the Online Gatherings, where we actually meet 3 times a week. There's an option of meeting 3 times a week. We meditate together so that becomes a regular part of our life. We explore the teachings of meditation so we have a better sense of what the tradition says about all this work. And we're always asking ourselves, how does this apply to our everyday life? So there's kind of 3 levels of resourcing that I offer people these days.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, for all the listeners, what would you recommend is the best time to meditate? Is it the morning? Is it afternoon? Is it night before you go to sleep? Is there a specific way or time of the day that the brain will be more prone to benefit from the meditation?
I mean, that's a really great question, and I'm going to answer it in 2 ways. The best time to meditate. On the one hand, mornings are great because there's a sense of freshness, and because it sets you up for your day, having had that quiet time, that settled time at the beginning. And also from a pragmatic point of view, you then know that your commitment to meditate has been taken care of. It's checked off second on the list, and there you go. So from one perspective, you could say morning's an ideal time. That said, one of the things I often say to people is that the easiest thing to do in the world is to not meditate. I don't know why that's the case, but it seems to be the case. The easiest thing to do is to not meditate. And so I really encourage people to look at the landscape of their own life and find what works for them. So the best time is the time that you're actually able to practice. And, by way of an example, there's someone that I've worked with for a number of years, and they meditate for 5 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, from 12 to 12:05. The lunch whistle goes, everybody leaves the office, and they sit at their desk for 5 minutes meditating. And then they go get lunch and continue on with their day. And then the weekends are given over to family and household responsibilities. They don't have the time. They don't have the bandwidth. And I remember when they, informed me of this, I was just really impressed because it seemed very practical, very pragmatic, very doable, and very empowering. Looking at the landscape of our lives, when am I able to do that? That's the best time to practice.
Beautiful. So is there any piece of advice that you would like to give to our listeners, especially those who have never really understood the benefits of meditation? How can they start? What should they start with?
Well, I mean, one of the things that's great about the time we live in is there are, so many resources out there that people can take advantage of, and just follow your gut instinct, so to speak. What feels like it has resonance and interest to you, and give it a shot. That said, the other thing that I'd offer is, remember that it's really pretty simple. Meditation is actually very simple. And whatever we're thinking or doing right now, we could just for 5 seconds take that attention, and we can do it right now as we're ending the podcast. Take your attention and just place it on, say, the feeling of your skin. Just place your attention on the feeling of your skin for 5 seconds and just breathe, let a long, deep breath go. And there you go. You've meditated.
Wow.
So
You don't need to be able to feel like in a trance, kind of like sleepy, but yet awake by anything that can actually awaken you. So it's not like a specific phase, like a REM sleep that you get into.
no. And that's that's a great point to come back to. GOM, becoming familiar with. What are we doing when we're meditating? We're becoming familiar with how it is for us. So if there's a should with meditation, what should I experience? What should I feel? It's whatever's going on for you right now. So if that's peace, that's what you feel. If it's anxiety, that's what you feel. If it's uncertainty, certainty, happiness, sadness, that's it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Neil, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story and skill set. Now, we hope that you have all enjoyed today's episode, and I'm very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 5 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened to today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Excellence is never an accident. It is the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, skillful execution, and the vision to see obstacles as opportunities. No matter what happens, the key is to never give up. Excellence and seeking perfection are not the same, as excellence is what you can comfortably achieve based on your skill set and competence, and perfection is what others expect you to achieve. Excellence can be obtained, perfection is never reachable. My name is Dr. Dan Emzalag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.